But we're gonna be looking at a passage today, and I do have to say that Donovan's and Liam, the worship service this morning, being able to remind us that God speaks, that even here in the midst that God is speaking, and that we can be listening and actively listening to Him, it was amazing. And reminding that He's at work, because that's what we'll be looking at. The passages reveals just an awesome God and the depth of His person. It engages us as a people, but we're going to focus on the human experience in the passage. But my hope for us this morning that you might be open to how God might be speaking, and you might be listening to His Holy Spirit. And the point of the passage is that God is speaking in ways you don't expect. God doesn't necessarily show up the way we think He is going to show up or the way that we think He should show up. So you might get a text from a friend, and that might be like send you off on a thought, and then the Holy Spirit might just meet you in a way that has nothing to do with my words this morning, and that's okay, because that's why we gather. And that's what we hope for, and that's what we trust in, and that's what the passage teaches. And for those of us who might not be all on board with this God thing this morning, because you're visitors, or because as we look in the passage today, maybe you tried it and maybe the faith thing is broken for you. My hope is just to open up the space for you, to let you know that God is there. There's not a wall up because you can't figure it out. God's arms are open and wide, just like the song said. So let me begin about talking about the video we saw. We didn't see the video, but the OTE video, middle school mission trip, right? The adventure trip up to Ligonier. I got to go on that trip, and it was an amazing crew of students I got to work with during our 3 days of work on Team Spider-Man. It was a great team. Katarina was our student leader. We actually had 2 student leaders. Xander was also with us, but he got traded away. We had Abigail, we had Royce, we had Riley, Sarah, Chris, Dewey, Izzy M, Izzy SJ, Gabby, and Kate. Had a great team. And honestly, Katarina and Dylan held it all together. Dylan helped us out one day because I wasn't even there for half of it. So half of the first day. And one of the tasks on our work site was this pile of gravel. And the gravel was on what used to be a sawdust volleyball court. And our job was to move the half pile of gravel and level it all down so that Living Waters Baptist Church could use the space for parking without sinking into the old volleyball court when they parked there. So we had this big pile of gravel, and we worked hard. And you got to know this about it. A lot of this gravel wasn't gravel. It was rocks the size of tennis balls. And you ever try to shovel rocks the size of tennis balls? They don't shovel too well. So they were starting. The team, we were just grabbing those rocks and throwing them hand over fist into buckets one at a time. And I got to tell you, when you start with a big pile of rocks and you start at the top and you fill up a bucket and you carry that bucket, you dump out that bucket, you rake that pile flat, and then you go back to that pile, it looks the same size. But you keep working and you go bucket after bucket, and then you start to see it goes down a little bit. And then eventually you see some more change and you get a little bit energized. Then we got one side low enough that we could start shoveling, because you can shovel at the bottom of the pile. And then we were pumped. We were tired, but we were pumped. And then this pile is going away. And then we get to the end. It's all level. It's all flat. You can park there. You could park 2 trucks there. They're not going to sink in. There's a sense of satisfaction. There's a sense also of exhaustion. And we felt like champions. I felt like a champion. Look, we killed it. This was amazing. Go Team Spider-Man. But what if at that moment, our host Jackie turns to us and say, hey, you guys, great job, but now will you move this pile too? What? Wait, there's more. I can't do it. I thought I was done. That's where we're going to find today's ordinary hero, Elijah. In 1 Kings 19, he had the biggest, baddest hero run of them all. He had done amazing things, and I know he must have felt like God's champion. But he wasn't done. He had run into something he didn't expect. And then when it hit him, it was just too big for him. So we find him in 1 Kings 19:4. We find him as he came to a broom bush. He sat down under it and he prayed that he might die. This is where we find Elijah. He had his hero run, then he got smacked in the face with an obstacle that was just too big for him. And he was like, this is overwhelming, I can't do it. And he runs away and he finds himself, he's like, oh man, I've had enough, Lord, take my life. Take my life. And he just closes his eyes and hopes it all goes away. You ever had those moments? The kind where it all seems too hard, you just want to close your eyes and it all goes away. Oftentimes it happens at work and school, and we understand those. You get too much homework, you get all your projects are due on the same day. Life can be hard, but so can having faith. So can believing. Believing can be hard too. Elijah's moment wasn't just a moment of life being too hard. It was a moment when having faith was too hard. He wanted to quit serving God. We're going to look at this moment in his life, and I hope we'll see how God is with us, even when our faith feels broken. You might not like that. My faith feels broken. How can faith be broken? I don't like that statement. Remember, today there's so much you can see about the majesty and the power and in the excellency and the life-givingness of God. But in this passage, as we look through these passages, we're going to be looking at Elijah's human experience. And sometimes our faith doesn't feel like it's working anymore. Before we get to his overwhelming moment, let's look back on his story. I think we often imagine that in the Bible times, everyone had this great faith in God, but it just wasn't that way. You see, Elijah was living in a country where most people didn't have faith in the God that he served. Looking at the end of 1 Kings 16, you'll see that Ahab and Jezebel had become king and queen of Israel. Ahab and Jezebel, along with most of the people, not all the people, but along with most of the people, followed Baal and they followed Asherah. Respectively, that's the God of making rain and the God of making babies. That's the background for Elijah. And then we get to 1 Kings 17:1, where Elijah enters, and we see this we see his entrance with these words. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve. Elijah defines his life by standing for the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who lives. He is defining his life by saying there is one God. There's one God with power. There's one God who is alive. There's one God who is able to give life, and he is the Lord. There's just one, and that's how he defines his life. It's like the song that we were singing, it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's his breath in our lungs, so there should be only one person, only one God that we follow. It should be the Lord. And that's what Elijah's whole mission is built around. Bringing everyone to get to see that God is the living God. He's the one that's powerful, and he's the one you should follow. And if you look, and again, I'm going to go quick summaries through here. A lot in 1 Kings 17, if you look through 1 Kings 17, we see that, yes, that's Elijah's mission to show that the Lord is living and powerful. But he doesn't just believe that the Lord is living and powerful. He actually gets to taste and see that the Lord actually gives life. You see, in 1 Kings 17, he gets to eat bread and meat that shouldn't exist except that God sent it to him. He prays for a son that has died, not his son, a widow's son, a son that has died, and that son's life is restored. He told the king, King Ahab, that there's not going to be any rain for 3 years. And guess what? It didn't rain. He did all of these things standing for the Lord. Elijah had faith. He didn't just have faith. It wasn't just something that was in him. He got to taste it and experience it and to live it and to show it to other people. This is championship stuff. This is just wow. And you think that's crazy. You wouldn't believe what he gets to do in 1 Kings 18. In 1 Kings 18, he had so much faith that he did a 1v 450, a one prophet of the Lord versus 450 prophets of the other god, Baal. He says a 1v 450 battle royale. It's me against you, just to prove that the Lord is the only true God. And it was like the Super Bowl, but instead of between football teams, it's between the prophets of Baal and the prophet Elijah. And whichever prophet can call out to their God and bring fire down on an altar, that God wins. That prophet wins. The 450 prophets of Baal, they tried for hours. They were crying out, they were screaming, they were pleading, they were giving gifts, and they were cutting themselves. They're doing all sorts of things to try and cajole Baal into doing something, into bringing fire. And then nothing. Elijah prayed once. The altar exploded with fire. He'd done it. He had proved to everyone, especially the king, which God is real and which God should be followed. He thought he was on the victory lap, that his job was done. And then we read in 1 Kings 19:2 that after Ahab had told the queen everything that had happened, the queen swears an oath. Kind of went like this: Elijah, let me be cursed if I haven't killed you by this time tomorrow. Now somebody's out for his life. You see, Elijah thought he had done it. He thought everybody was going to start like, yay, yeah, Elijah, you're great. I want to follow your God. We're all in on this. And they were up on the mountaintop, and then they're like, yeah, get those prophets of Baal, get them out of here. And they go and they execute them all. At that point, I will say there are a lot of hard things in these passages, and if you have questions as you're reading them, you should talk about them to each other. You should ask questions. You should go to the picnic and ask those people, hey, what does this mean in this passage? You should be talking about them because there's a lot of hard stuff in here. But Elijah, he thought on the mountaintop it had all worked out. And then he came down and he finds out everybody's not on board. It's not working out the way he had thought. He had done so much. So when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. Tim Keller says that of his servant. So Elijah's servant is like, he's got this ministry and he has a staff. He has this person who kind of does things for him and works out for him. And by leaving his servant, Elijah is quitting. He's like, I'm done. I've served the Lord, but I can't do it anymore. And that's when we get back to verse 4. He came to the broom bush, sat down under it, and he prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. He was so overwhelmed with what he was facing that he just lays down, closes his eyes. His faith was broken. He'd lost all hope. Something was gone. Yesterday he was God's champion, and now he doesn't even want to exist. This is when we get to see God's response. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals, a jar of water. He ate and he drank, and then he lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time, and he touched him. He said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up, and he ate and he drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, and there he went into a cave, and he spent the night. Part of me thinks that all of Elijah's superhuman, faith-filled adventures for the Lord were all just so we could see how God responds when Elijah's faith doesn't work anymore. And how does God respond? God gives him rest. He gives him food. He gives him warm bread. There's a touch of comfort from the angel. God doesn't say to Elijah, hey, kiddo, come on, pick yourself up. Let's get to it. You got to get over this. There's no rush. There's just tenderness when Elijah feels broken. I've been experiencing on how people experience love this past year. And I've been reminded of an experience with my mother when I was in 6th grade. I would wake up often with croup throat, so I'd wake up wheezing. It felt like the breath couldn't get through, and it felt like my breath wasn't going to work anymore. And I'd cry out, and she would come in with a cold drink, and I would sip the cold drink, and she would rub my back until I felt better. And I was reminded of this past year that drink and that comfort, that touch, that's the love I experienced as a child. This is what Elijah's getting. This is what God's sending him. Before sending him his word, before sending him his truth, tenderness and care. You see, I've gotten to see students whose faith gets broken. There are so many distractions that they feel they just don't have time for Jesus. And so there's like this drift that happens, and they lose touch. Or they start giving in to behaviors that they thought a faith in Jesus should avoid, so they stop coming around because they don't think faith works for them anymore. There's the thought that I wish I could feel close to God again, but I need to clean up my life first. So it's just too hard. I can't do it. My hope for those students, because we see it all the time, my hope for those students is to see that God's first movement towards them is tenderness and grace. The first movement is not them trying to make faith work again, because faith can feel broken. It's broken right here for Elijah. And we're going to see at the end of the story, it never really gets fixed for him. Sometimes it feels broken for us. All you need from God, all you need to make space for is not how your faith is going to work, but to receive his tenderness and his grace. But God doesn't rush him, but he also doesn't leave him in this place of brokenness. God asks the question, and the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" You see, God doesn't need answers. He's just creating an opportunity to listen. Because he's in pain. Here's your chance to speak. And he does speak. He's like, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars and put your prophets to death with the sword. And I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. And you know what? It's just too much." What I hear Elijah saying is that no one cares. I tried it. It didn't work for me. It might work for others. It did not work for me. And I'm all by myself in this. And I am not safe. We know from other parts of the story that Elijah, he's not right about this because he's not the only one that follows the Lord, but God doesn't correct him. God doesn't correct him. He doesn't fix his information or fix the way he's thinking. God invites Elijah to come closer, to see the Lord more fully, and perhaps even breathe new life into his faith. In verse 11, the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And this is where I just need to take a break from the whole message, and I need to say this. Do you ever have one of those friends? Do you ever have one of those friends who, even when they're down on their luck in life, they seem like they're winners? Okay, Elijah seems a whole lot like that to me because in chapter 17 and chapter 18, man, he's getting to taste the bread. He's getting to see the power of God at work. And now, man, he's feeling broken. It's not working. And he's on the mountaintop and God's about to pass by. And it's like that guy who has that 67 Chevy that's been restored. He spent years on it. He's out driving it. And then it gets demolished in an accident. Everybody's okay, but his pride and joy, it's just gone. The guy who caused the accident feels so bad for you, he gives you a Tesla. And I'm like, I feel bad for you, but you're driving a Tesla. It's kind of how I feel about Elijah right now. Like I enter into his moment, but wow, look at what's happening in this passage. Look at what's happening in this story. And here it goes. The Lord is about to pass by, and a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart, and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face, he went out, and he stood at the mouth of the cave. You see, what we get here is a beautiful picture of God gently inviting his child back into the story. It's as though God is saying, "What are you doing running away, Elijah? And all you've seen, do you still not know me? Come out and I'll show you what you're missing." Sometimes there are powerful moments, but I'm present here in the gentle whisper. You thought I was only showing up when you spoke my word and displayed my power, but Elijah, just listen. All of us just listen. The thing about a whisper is that it's there, but if you're not careful, you can miss it. If you're not listening, you can miss it. What God's saying is, he's saying, I'm always here. This is my world. You're my child. I've always been at work, and I'm never surprised. The reason I work in ministry is because I believe that God is speaking and that he's working in each and every one of our lives. That he's working and he's going to continue to work. And I get to invite people to walk alongside high school students who are often overwhelmed and feel alone, who sometimes feel broken and who often feel their faith is broken. And we walk alongside them in tenderness and grace and patience that they might hear God speaking to them. I've seen the pain look on students' faces that when they're desperate for a companion that is anything like a peer that would walk with them and discover the world in faith with them. We can't make those friends with them. We can't make those friends for them or provide those friends for them. It's kind of one of those things you have to go through alone, and you feel sometimes your faith isn't working when you're all alone, but we get to walk alongside them, tell them stories to remind them that God has not gone anywhere. Take rest, listen, because he is speaking. And we get to where the story continues for Elijah. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" the voice says again. After Elijah had gotten to hear the whisper, he's getting to hear the voice. The gentle whisper is speaking to him. He's experiencing God's presence. And we see that Elijah's response is still the same. It's the same response. Verse 14, it's the same response. And what we get is it's still the same. It's just me all alone. I can't do it. Things aren't working out the way I thought or the way I'd hoped or the way I'd planned, and I still feel broken. That's Elijah's experience. That's what's happening for him. God isn't done with Elijah, and that gentle whisper recommissions him for service. Even though his faith is broken, God is still inviting him in and waiting for him. I'm reminded of a lunch I had with a high school senior. He was a boy. He had lots of friends. He was well-connected. He was playing 3 sports, super popular in the school, lots and lots of friends. He was just struggling with being able to follow God. He wasn't struggling with some special task that God had given him, like, oh, I have to go tell my whole school about Jesus, or I have to go do these hard things for Jesus. That's not what his struggle was. His struggle was actually just living as a Christian, because no one else was living as a Christian. You see, there were behaviors in his life that he knew needed to go. He knew needed to go, but those behaviors were deeply connected to his friendships. And if I really follow God, I'm going to be all alone, and that's just too much for me. It's just too hard. I cannot do this thing alone. Because I look around and no one else is doing this Jesus thing. No one else is doing this Jesus thing, and none of my friends are, and I'm a senior. I lose my friend's senior year. What is that? And that he didn't feel like it was working. He felt that the faith was just too much for him. I really want to. It just seems impossible. I don't think I can do it. One day he ends up going to a Bible study at his school, and when he gets there, he's just surprised. He's like, there were 3 guys from my team there, 2 people from my class. He never knew they would all be here. And here's the thing, he knew those people, and they were all at the same functions as he's at. God had been at work, not just in him, calling him and inviting him, but God had been at work in others. But there was a time where it was just too hard. He just couldn't see it. He just couldn't see it. You see, the invitation is there for us, and Elijah's story is actually an illustration for us. It's as though God were speaking to each of us. To Elijah, God is speaking. He's like, Elijah, am I enough? Elijah, can you trust me? Elijah, can you trust me even when it doesn't seem safe? Elijah, will I be enough when you seem like you're all alone? Can you trust me? Even if you can't trust me, I will be speaking in gentle whispers just like I always have. I've always been there and continue to work even when you can't see me, even when you can't trust how I am working. I invite you to trust. The dialogue can continue with each of us. God could be speaking to us saying, can you be certain that things will turn out the way you want them to? No. Can you be certain that you'll be safe? No. But you can have confidence that I am working and that you're not alone. Can you be certain that I will stand and demonstrate my power when you want it or think you need it? No. But you can be confident that I will be at work and that I will always be speaking and that I will be with you and I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. You see, and we hear that promise. We hear the promise, I will never leave you or forsake you. But what if we leave? What if we feel like we can't stick it out anymore? If we get overwhelmed and want to quit it all, then what? Just like Elijah, God will meet you with tenderness and care. And the words of J.D. Greer, his still, small, powerful, earth-shattering, mountain-moving voice of tenderness and grace will always be speaking. May we make the space to hear and receive.